Hey there, and welcome back to The Fuse Show. I'm David Tran, one of the co-hosts of this show, as well as the founder of Xfusion.io. Today I'm joined by Aaron Schumm. He's the founder and CEO of Vestwell, an entirely new kind of digital workplace savings platform transitioning the way employers and employees are powering the $33 trillion in retirement savings for the benefit of everyone. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I was able to take a look at your website, and I think the first thing that caught my attention was the optimism you have just towards life in general. You mentioned how you had an injury in your youth, and that was one of the potentially best things that ever happened in your life. And I think it's kind of cool to see how the strangest of things that we perceive to be negative in the moment might have the most positive outcomes down the line. So I've read through the journey of your website, but for our guests who may not have had the chance to check out your website, can you give me the breakdown of your story?
Yeah, I mean, the short version, it's been a path that has not been planned. It's just happened, and was fortunate enough to kind of see enough of the decision point to say this is a great path to journey down. So long story short, grew up in Chicago, cut my teeth in the retirement space kind of by accident. I was in the large corporate ERISA side at a large trust company in Chicago called Northern Trust, doing pension plan analysis, and I'm sure most users are younger than I am to even understand what the pension plans were. But that was really the impetus for how retirement 401ks specifically were spawned. And it's been a transition into that world. But anyway, I moved to New York with the aspiration of going into investment management, and fell into the tech side by accident as a product manager, and really had great managers and bosses who just allowed me to be a wide-eyed, curious person and ask why a number of times to the point of annoyance. And they just said, listen, here's a couple developers, interesting idea, go figure it out. So that was kind of my first foray. And these are old school, like, Linux based, but it looked like the old DOS type structure, the blue screen stuff. And, but we had developed, a program in the wealth management world called Unified Managed Accounts in today's world. At the time, it was called multi-strategy portfolios. That's what we affectionately called it. But that really became kind of the backbone for how a lot of the wealth management world has continued to grow and what people expect. Fast forward anyway, I got burnt out there. I was in grad school, flying back and forth, and down to Duke, and then said, hey, listen, I had to leave. So I tapped out. My boss said, hey, I'm following you out the door, at some point. And then our last day, we were having a beer at a bar in Princeton, New Jersey. And we started drawing up just like, hey, the industry needs this. And we started drawing circles on a bar napkin, literally. And I wish I had that napkin. We didn't really think anything of it, right? Other than, we got along great. And so fast forward, I leave. 6 months later, he calls me. And I was moving to London to, just kind of venture to a new world, that I hadn't experienced before. And he said, hey, you remember that idea we talked about? Do you want to go do it? And I said no. I was like, I appreciate it, but I'm out of here. My lease is up. My rent's, right done. I packed my bags. I got my visa, and he said, no, just come in. Let's talk about it. So I went in and we sat down, and he's like, I got someone I think will back us, and we can kind of build this. And that's what we became. So he convinced me. I jumped in, co-founded that business. And it became my former company called Folio Dynamics. And over there, I ran revenue for the business. I ran product design, development, marketing strategy, and so on.
How much did you know prior versus you having to learn on the spot?
How much did I know prior? I mean, not a lot. I was always one of those people, though. Like, I've been fortunate to see how things interconnect quite well. And kind of dig into the stuff that probably people ignore or don't think about, right? So I knew enough of the moving pieces, but I didn't know enough about the intricacy of them. And then I just like anyone, you be intellectually curious and dig in and figure it out. But I always had the confidence, like, I'll figure it out. Like, there's, I'm not the smartest person in the world by any means, but But I was like, I have the ability to figure things out, and I've always kind of pushed myself to do that, and with whatever it is. And so anyway, so we built this wealth management platform, and a lot of ups and downs and trials and tribulations. And we went out, we were raising our Series A, our first round of financing, right when in March of '08, when the whole financial market collapsed, and we were, just lived through one of the hardest moments of my life. Partly it was we were out of cash, credit cards maxed out, couldn't pay rent. But like, we were just like, we can do this. We know there's a market. We just need time, and we need, someone to back us. And when, we got someone to back us in the 11th hour. And that's what, turned into a rather successful company. A few years into that business, we had 30 employees. They asked for their own 401k. So we went through the process of doing that. And in that process, we brought in an advisor, and he gave us a 401k. And it was so confusing, right? And it was so painful. And I remember one time I lost my password, and then it was like they had to like mail you this thing for another thing to eventually get in. It was like a multi-week process to reset your password, right? Like the little things. And I was like, this can't be this hard, right? And I was sitting back looking at it saying, hey, I'm not the smartest person, but I know a lot more about this industry and the intricacies of financial services and technology than the vast majority of individuals. If I'm having this much trouble, how much trouble would other people be having, right? If you're in, I don't know, let's say you're in a marketing agency or something, whatever, pick an industry, right, outside of financial technology and services. So that was the spawn. This was 2010. And I was like, we could build a retirement system, right? And marry wealth and retirement together, because, everyone starts saving in the workplace. 90+% of Americans, like 75% of Americans, it's their only source of invested asset from the workforce. So it's like, if you're starting there and you expect people to get to a wealth account, if you can bring these worlds together, you bridge that gap and really create this kind of, Uber platform. So I approached our investors at the time to do this back in 2010, and they're like, that's a great idea, awesome, but we have so much to do to stay focused on the wealth side. Fast forward a few years, we sell that business, and I just said, listen, I want to go solve this problem. Like, I see it, I know how these players work. I didn't know anything about retirement per se. Like, I wasn't a retirement expert, but I just knew the moving pieces in the puzzle and how they had to fit together. So I ventured off to go build this, and it was much easier this time around. Different problem, super hard and complex. But I picked up enough through my failings in life and experiences to learn a lot about what not to do. And that's important. And that's what kind of,
that's important.
It's incredibly important. I always tell people all the time. We just finished our internship program with a great crew that we brought in, and, sitting down and chatting with them. And that's one of the things I always harp on people, like, learn what not to do just as much as you learn what to do, right? And it's okay, and I encourage people to make mistakes as long as they're not too expensive. but it's just like, hey, you're going to stumble through these things, but then that's where you realize where the pain lies in some of these equations, and then you can incorporate that in other aspects. So anyway, that was kind of the spawn of Vestwell, and we approached the market through a different lens, where we said, hey, we want to solve workplace savings, but we're not out to go, become, the next Morgan Stanley, the next whoever, right? It wasn't like, let's go build this big brand, but let's really understand how the world or the industry got to where it is, right? There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of, there's a reason why it has gotten to this point, and not to, it's been incredibly successful in a lot of ways, but there's also big, gaps in areas of opportunities for improvement. So we said, let's understand what's happened, where those pain points still lie, and let's just try to fix that, but with the respect and recognition of how the industry got to this place, and then let's try to reset the bar with how it moves forward. So we're kind of, most of the people won't ever hear about us, but we think of ourselves a bit as like the engine behind the scenes, right? Where we want to be powering kind of everyone in some facet, but in a unconflicted, modern way that people now expect how to engage in anything we do day to day.
What would you say are the underlying parts of your personality and experience that lead you to want to solve these really, really large problems?
I have I wouldn't have thought it was natural, but I tend to gravitate towards complex things. And maybe it's just the curiosity, right? And just liking that to ask why something is that way, right? It's funny, like you saw my son briefly before this for a second, but he's the same way. He's like, Daddy, he's at that stage where why everything, right? And I love it. And I find it so refreshing that it's just whatever it is. It's like, why, what if all the rocks in the world disappeared? Right? What would happen, right? And so just asking why kind of has pushed me. But I think also I saw an opportunity. I saw the world changing. I saw fintech evolve just at light speed from the time we started Fully Dynamics to today at Vestwell, and I saw an adaptation where a lot of traditional players were now saying, hey, listen, there used to be the mindset where a large institution would say, we're just going to go build it, right? We're going to have, endless amounts of money in many regards, and we're just going to go spend the time and resources building it. And then there was this change where they said, you know what, we can't build it because we can't keep up and we don't have the expertise. So there was a willingness for people to say, we're going to take something from the outside or take something new that they wouldn't have bet on earlier. And then I saw other businesses coming to market that I thought were super interesting, and I really liked what they were doing. But knowing kind of how some of these pieces come together, I thought the business models were inherently flawed, and not to say they're go out of business, right. But
suboptimal.
Wasn't. Yeah, it just wasn't. It wasn't sustainable, and and I said, listen, there's people need this. They need to be able to save in the workplace. It's the most effective thing for people to do, and I'm worried that if people bet on the wrong solution because it's cool and sexy and snazzy and has these cool bells and whistles, that ultimately that fails because their investors get anxious or whatever, they can't turn a profit and the market turns on them, and and I said, listen, we're gonna solve it the way that I feel is right, that's sustainable, that really allows people to build on this for the future, and I want investors around me who allow us to do that, and I think ultimately, like to your point in your question, like I also just have this refusal to fail, right? Even though I have a bunch of failures in many regards, right? But I just have this tenacity and just this I just will not stop. It's going to, and people kind of my wife has told me this. She's some of her friends, but how did you you guys were having your first child and your husband just goes and starts a new company from scratch. How did you get behind that, right? And you got everything going on in your life. And she's like, I just know he will not quit and he just won't fail. He just refuses, and that has its downsides. Right? It's exhausting, but I've got a lot of years without sleep, so I've just kind of gotten accustomed to that. But I think that's kind of what's done it. It's listen, it's a complex problem. I know how to solve it, and I'm definitely not going to fail at it. So that just gave me enough maybe confidence to go do it. And being okay being uncomfortable.
Was your first solution always to build an engine that powers other companies, or was there some point where you considered being a competitor to Vanguard or the like?
I would say there was an option to go build a brand that before we even went to market, I took off the table.
I see.
It was just it was quickly nah, that's not who we are. That's not my DNA. It's I know this piece, and it's not, again, it's not something that's impossible to figure out, but I was this is how we know how to do it the most efficient way possible that's really sustainable, and that's where we're kind of stuck.
Earlier you mentioned some of the inefficiencies of the incumbent in the space. Can you elaborate on that? Where do you feel the industry was leaving gaps before Vestwell came onto the plate?
Yeah, so this is, I think a lot of people don't understand this, nor should they. Right? You're a glutton for punishment. One of my board members, she jokes with me. She's like, how did you pick this industry? She's like, this is just so complex. But there's so many moving pieces. So I'll try to distill it quickly. So most of this industry is powered by a few players, right? There's like three or four companies that kind of power this entire, macro industry of, trillions of dollars. And they've been very successful at it. But what has shifted is our parents' generations were, they worked at large, Fortune 500 companies or whatnot. My parents didn't actually, but my dad was a carpenter for a small business. But as people shifted into kind of getting smaller and going out on their own, or doing startups or whatnot, 99% of businesses in this country are small businesses, right? By volume of business, there's 30 million, over 30 million small businesses in the country. And the technologies that were built to power this industry, born out of that pension era, were pre-internet for all intents and purposes.
Right.
They've been remade to a degree, but like the core, the guts of it can only do so much, which has not allowed them to efficiently serve the small market, the small businesses, right? And so either those providers said, strategically, they're like, we're not going to touch the small businesses because it's a money losing business for us, or we're going to provide something to them, but it's going to be incredibly expensive, right? And then as the employee or the business owner or both, right, that has a lot of downstream implications that work to the detriment of greater society, right? And and we said, listen, if you actually do this a better way, the right way, and you solve for problems that, the way I think about it, we solve for pieces of the puzzle that are non-value add critical components to how it works, right? And just to give two quick examples, one is like payroll processing and eligibility, right? That go together. Like, how do you connect to payroll? How do you ingest the data? How do you determine who's eligible and who's not within a business to follow ERISA law, right? We have, ERISA and IRS and the Department of Labor and the SEC that we have to, line up against and make sure we're doing that effectively and efficiently and doesn't snowball out of control. And then, but you don't need people in that, right? Or you don't want people in that because having people shuttle data from one system to another is not value add, right? So, but the systems that were, in place didn't really have an effective way to do that, or like loan processing, right? People, you hope you don't need a loan out of your 401k, but sometimes people do, or hardship withdrawal or something. And that process is really cumbersome. There's a lot of paper, a lot of, whatnot. And that's the point. If someone needs a loan, right, out of their 401k or a hardship withdrawal, they're typically not in a great point in their life, right? And they're under a lot of stress. So how do you alleviate that and make it, easy? And hopefully, you can't do it instantaneously, unfortunately, but you can get it as close as you can and do it through technology, right? We spend a lot of time and brain power, focused on those aspects. But when you do that, you do it efficiently, it dramatically also drives down the cost to serve beyond creating a better experience, which allows you to create a discounted offering to someone with a better experience, right? And keep the flexibility around what they would expect in that sort of workplace savings program.
So you mentioned earlier that you're an engine behind these other investment groups as opposed to being the investment group yourself or investment vehicle. How'd you get started with finding people, finding these partners to work with these small businesses?
So, I have been in this industry for a while, right? And it is very, there's a lot of relationships. There's a lot of people that you get to know over the years. I didn't necessarily know people in retirement per se, but I just, again, it's interesting how often people respond when you just reach out. You're like, hey, I want to, or even when I was kicking around this idea, I just called a bunch of old clients or partners and I was like, hey, am I crazy to think if I could build this, people would use it? And the response was always like, that's awesome. If you could do that, I would do it all day, right? And I was like, well, why hasn't anyone done it, right? And they're like, yeah, there's people who do this, but they don't do it in a really effective way of how we were approaching it. And we're also, again, kind of this is, again, something that people probably don't generally understand, but financial advisors play such an incredibly important role in this industry. And it's actually, I think mindsets are like, hey, I don't need an advisor, I can do this on my own, right? It's actually the reverse in workplace savings. It's actually the advisor importance has actually increased over time. It's grown from like 68% of workplace plans had an advisor, back in like '08, and now it's like in the mid 90s. And so the financial advisors are really relevant, right, in helping people through these problems, whether it's like designing something for the business owners or engaging with the employees and helping them. And, we survey people all the time, and it's just always kind of shocking when you see how many employees want to talk to an advisor, right? And so we built it with the mindset of like, how do we equip the advisors, because they're really important in this, and make their lives easier, make their clients, who are the businesses, feel better and have something, that they can offer their employees, create retention, save cost, all the
Right.
benefits that go with that. And then allow them to engage with employees at mass scale. So we've kind of like, again, back to the point where we just really understood that who the players were. And then, you also, you bring in people we have a pretty cool team where there's a lot of industry knowledge in retirement. There's industry knowledge in wealth management, and there's industry knowledge in fintech, right? And if you put a lot of the smart people in a room and give them enough alcohol, you get some really cool ideas that come out of it, right? And that was how we actually designed.
I should try that strategy more often.
No, we literally, like, one of the kind of groundbreaking kind of engines that we built behind the scenes, that's like a core of what we do. We just sat in a room with, a bunch of beer, and we whiteboarded, and we're like, why do we need this? Why do you need this? And then we just started kind of like just dissecting it, right, to a really, painful level. But it was super interesting. And then we were just like, oh, why can't we just do this, right? And that became kind of reinvention of how we thought about the world in this space entirely. And, it's hard for some people to wrap their head around it not being in the space, and that's okay. But we just said, we try to distill it in a semi-simple way. But it's really exciting to see kind of the change in mindset of how much interest there is around this space in general. Even at the state level, right? We go live in a couple of weeks with the state of Oregon and Oregon Saves, right? And these state programs have really kind of taken a lead, and they're just like, listen, small businesses are not equipping employees to save for a bunch of reasons, and we're going to start, helping them do so in an efficient, effective way. They're doing it through IRA programs, not through 401ks. But it's great to see. And then when you ask them why they're doing this and why, they're just like, listen, we can't support the deficits that we get put there. They're already a deficit as a state budget, perspective. Right. But now now if someone can't pay their hospital bill and the state has to pick up the bill, right, that they can't support that forever. So how do you start to offset that and move it upstream? And it's a long road. It's a long tail that we're kind of, playing in. But it's like I said, I've always told our investors, like, we're taking the long road, but it's the right one. And it's the one that's ultimately most sustainable for everyone. And you got to be behind it to do this. And we've been fortunate enough to have awesome people around us help us.
How early did you take this idea to investors? How much of a product did you have? How much of an idea did you have at that stage?
I had a PowerPoint. I had, so I will say this. I had a PowerPoint and not successfully exited a business that was in a very tangential, relevant space to what I'm doing, I would not have been. It wouldn't have been as easy as it was. I had a PowerPoint. I started talking to, folks I knew. And some people are like, yeah, I'll do it. And then I did a quick convertible note that was quickly oversubscribed. I had to give a lot of the money back, actually. And then we did a seed round on top of it. And then, it all happened very, very fast.
And can you remind me when this happened?
This was in the summer of 2016. We closed our seed, and we just actually closed it. Our 5-year anniversary closing. It was a couple of weeks ago. It was, I think, September 8th. September 8th of 2016. So it happened pretty quickly. I found a few guys that I knew or they're friends of friends that had built a relationship with a good trust, and was like, here's the folks I need. I need someone to do a full stack, build. I need a back-end engineer. I'm not a developer. I don't know how to code, but the product experience, but I need someone to help me design it. And then I needed some, security and ops compliance stuff. And just really said, okay, here's the market we're going after. Here's how. It was a lot of whiteboarding, a couple of guys had jobs still that, Saturday mornings doing it. I was advising a company, and helping them out in the interim while I was kind of doing this in the background. And, just a lot of time and thought put into it. And then we baked enough of it. I had some designs actually from Ryan Anderson, who's actually our head of product and design now. And, he helped me kind of like take what was in my mind and make it look a lot prettier than I ever would. And we put it down and then I was like, here's what we want to do. Right. And then people poke holes in it and I appreciate that. I think you got to have thick skin, right? And be okay with people telling you like, nah, here's what's flawed. And I didn't know enough about this, how, I knew fintech and I knew financial services, but not necessarily like ERISA, right? The ERISA side of it was new to me. So it was really, a learning experience of what I needed to know and care about. And then I could help form, better decisions along the way.
Would you say there's any relationship between each funding round and the level of stress you had during that stage? Like, does it get easier over time? Does it get more stressful over time? Is there no relationship?
Oh, that's a good question. It gets easier.
Okay.
Definitely gets easier. You get better team, you get better scale, it's just different problems, right? It's different points, right? Early days, you do everything, right? You're building financial models and then doing product design and then, QA testing and all that stuff, right? So it's not, you're sweeping the floors, like literally it's everything. And, as you start to get a team and you get people around you that you really can trust and know they can drive, it gets easier. The funding rounds get easier in many ways, but it's also they're quite different. It's not the same. I notice you're where you hone in on your story changes. There's certain things. Obviously the players change, right? A seed stage investor is not a growth stage investor, right? They all have their different, points of view and whatnot. You also get better at, I think when you start, you get enamored by all these cool conversations you get to have with people. And then you kind of start really seeing through it, or as you get, more seasoned and you're like, I say no a lot to people who investors who come to us. They're like, hey, we want to talk or this. And I'm like, thanks, but you guys aren't a good fit for whatever reason. Right. Or hey, we're just heads down and you don't want to be distracted with it. So you start to get more focused. It's less traumatic, right? I always, I used to kind of joke, you could startup world, you can have your best day and your worst day on the same day, 2 hours apart. Right. And it's such a, tumultuous ride in many ways, but then as you get more sure-footed, it becomes a lot easier. I will say too, though, this time around, I've maybe it's just maturity or whatnot, but I've learned a lot of what to really care about. There's it's so easy to get caught up in stuff that a small fire that's burning, and before you'd be like, oh my God, I got to go put that out. Now I'm like, that's okay. You can let that burn for a minute, right? This is where we really need to focus the attention. But a lot of it too is just the passion and care. It's your baby in many ways, right? So you're just and I hate there are times we make mistakes, or there's times where things don't go right, or maybe it's not our fault at all, but we're servicing someone and someone's pissed off for whatever reason, and I hate it when we don't do as well as I know we can, right? And those are the things that I think I find more frustrating. The capital raise side is just part of it. It's also a big distraction. I know businesses that always, I know some folks in the startup world, and they're very good at raising capital and they love raising capital, but they're in perpetual capital raise mode, where I'm just like, I want to get capital and I want to not think about it at all. And I want to go back to building business, right? And because it's so easy to just, you go through all the stuff and it happens in the background and you can't really like let your team in on it, right? It's basically me and my CFO, right? And we're doing all this, but so it can be a big distraction from the core of what you're trying to do.
So if you like to be more of an active builder, an active problem solver versus a fundraiser, and I recognize from season to season your priorities are going to change, but for this current season of your company's life, what would you say your like day to day, week to week, or month to month priorities are, if you can choose them?
It's all over the map. It's funny, like so one thing I'm a capital raiser. This is a little anecdote I always give. It is fun to capital raise when you have a great business and the attractions there and whatnot, right? It's hard to get the no's, right? You don't want the no's, especially if it's a no from someone that you really didn't want to know from. But that's okay, right? And you learn a lot from it. And I do think it's very important to ask why you get a no, right? If someone does, and there's always, some good reasons, some reasons you're just like, whatever, like it just is what it is. But it's also like, like you're looking for an apartment or a house and it's really fun for like the first couple that you go see. And then all of a sudden then you're like, they all kind of blend together. And then you don't want to do it anymore. And then you're just like, oh, whatever. I always kind of play that in my mind when I'm capital raising. It's like the first couple, you're like, awesome, let's go, it's fun. And then you're like, another one of these. So the stuff. So here's the stuff. I mean, some of it's you got the capital raise side. It's a lot of drilling into what's important today. Like we have a couple huge things in flight right now that let's call it like 5 major projects. And depending on where they are in their particular kind of production or life cycle, like I'm kind of zeroing in on those. It could be like today, it was like it went from board prep for my upcoming meeting next week with a few board members to talking about, some of what the board deck's going to look like and the points we're going to hit on and what we're going to ask. Then it was, I talked to 2 candidates for a senior role I'm looking to hire. We had a management meeting to discuss, some specific things around payroll processing and payroll setup for some folks. And then we talked about some like the big projects. And then I have, I had a legal compliance call about, kind of how we're looking, forward for other things we're anticipating with new program types we're rolling out. So like it just kind of you get pulled in every direction, and then then you got your kids needing something, and then you got to shift gears, and it's all over the map. And sometimes it's stressful, especially when you're doing like today's world. Like last couple of days, it's just back to back from literally the I sit down at my desk at 8:30, and then it's straight through until about 7 p.m.
True. Okay.
And then 7 to 9 is like with the kids, and then they're in bed, and then I'm usually back working for a couple hours till I run out of gas and got to put my head down.
How big is your team today?
We are at just over 150 now.
And
we'll be at like 220 by the end of the year.
And what's the division between different departments?
It's about a third engineering, maybe a little over, maybe 40% of engineering product. Then you have kind of about a third of like ops, admin, compliance, and then the rest kind of like either sales, management, things like that, legal. We got so it's a pretty I don't want to say evenly dispersed. I mean, obviously we tilt a lot to product and engineering, but there's still a lot of things that have to be done with people. And we're I don't think everything should be automated, and you can't solve everything with technology. So we do, you got to have client services and all of that are a big part of what we do.
What's your philosophy around hiring now that you've hired over 100 people, either directly or indirectly?
So, I mean, we've hired 100 people this year.
Okay. Pretty crazy growth.
It's a lot. I mean, it's like, and I used to interview Every person I sat down with, and would kind of talk to, just to like see where their heads were. And I've hired and fired enough people in my career to like know like who really has it, right? Sometimes you make mistakes, but hope you catch those early. But philosophy is usually around like I'm one of those people that I would just want really smart people who have this tenacity and just really want to do it through the customer centric mind and go and figure it out, right? Take ownership, accountability, willing to help each other, willing to help the team. I think to me that's really important, and I don't think they need to be experts in fintech or financial services. You want a few of those people, obviously, to kind of balance it out. But I often say like I just want good people, smart people that I can basically throw on the pitch and design a play around and say, you're super talented, we'll figure it out. Like, but get out there and you're going to be successful. So that's kind of been my philosophy, and it's worked. But like I said, you do want people who are really good at certain things. You also have to recognize like who's like an individual contributor, who's a team leader or manager or whatnot. Like those are, and not everyone, and it's okay. Or like if someone's just like, listen, I'm an IC, that's great. Like there's a role for you. Like, well, let's go figure it out, right? So you got to find the right balance of where people really kind of will fit in.
And now that you're at a reasonable scale, like how do you build company culture now that you don't have the opportunity to directly interact, or maybe you do indirectly interact with all 150?
Yeah, so I try to, even like I proactively reach out to a lot of the new hires and just like either put time in their calendar or ask them to put time on my calendar, because I like they can all view it, and I'm just like, hey, you see a spot graphic, right? Or sometimes it's like I was like, okay, I need 5 minutes for myself. But it's great because I do want people to have that opportunity, and I think. I like the idea of, like I said, the culture is more around like, the tenacity, the helping, help each other, take ownership, be accountable, really push each other, and making sure that we're all in it together. Like it doesn't, and you have to really communicate. And it's hard because we have such a complex industry with so many moving parts. Like we're not building an application that does like one thing, right? It's you have so many moving pieces to what it does. You have a lot of different personas that you're managing towards, right? From asset managers to financial services companies to businesses, employees, and everything. Payroll companies. They all come together. So having intercompany, communication around these things is hard, right? Especially in a remote world, right? When you're in the office, we used to like kind of strategically put teams near each other so they could overhear each other talking, because you just learn a lot by just hearing, right? And you don't get that in today's world, right? And now we're mostly remote, and some people have still go to the office. I go a few days a week, but it's hard to continue to do that. So we try to do a lot of like lunch and learns, like once every week or every other week. We'll do an all hands once a month. We'll do a lot of like product demos, and we try to bring people together. We'll like have everyone get lunch, even if it's virtual, and we'll kind of do like meetings together and walk through whatever, some topic. And I think that's helped with the culture. We created a culture committee. I personally, and I'll be the first to admit this, and I've said this many times on my team, like I'm not one who's like all like, let's focus on the culture. I'm more like, let's focus on the business and the culture will create itself, right? But you do need people who are willing to carry the torch on the culture and like bring people around. We have a great people ops team that does that, and the committees they've formed around it. So I've been proud to see it kind of, it hasn't created itself. Like there's been work put into it, but I've been proud to see what it's become, and the folks that have been driving that.
I noticed on your website, based on your advisory board, I saw the face of Aaron Schilkraut. I can't remember if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I was like, where have I seen that face and name before? And I was like, shoot, I remember him. He's like, we were both at Uber together at the same time. Really? So I was like, oh, that's such a small world. So I guess the question I have is like, how'd you build out your advisory board? Like, I think there's a lot more advisors on your board than I've seen for a lot of other companies.
Yeah, so it's funny. So Aaron's a longtime friend. We used to. I'm trying to think how long. It's been 15 years or so.
Wow.
And we used to sit around and once every few weeks, so once a week, once every couple of weeks, we would just sit around. We would get dinner. It was usually Aaron and myself and Brian Schechter, who was one of his co-founders from his previous lives. And we used to just throw our ideas at each other and chat. And we're like, we're going to do this and that and whatever. And, we had always had this aspiration to work together. Right. And, we were actually, it was funny. Like we were building out this concept of actually what became Robinhood. This is long before it was Robinhood. But I decided I just didn't want to go into right. But they were like cool ideas that came up through this stuff. But how I built out the advisory board was, as you're building the organization, you want to hire talented people, but you always kind of need like a mentor in many ways or a sounding board. And they were just people that I had either met or knew over the years that I respected and thought they would be helpful. And I said, listen, okay, like Jamie, I wanted Jamie to help in the tech team, right? I wanted Jamie as a CTO, but he was, kind of sailing off into the sunset after, a very successful career. But I'm like, I want you around, right? So he's been a huge help, throughout all of this. And he's still I talk to him at least a couple of times a week, probably. And then, in Aaron, I was like, listen, you've been really successful, super thoughtful in how you, approach things either from marketing, communications, otherwise. So I had him, he helped out with our marketing team. Lowell over at who was at Quovo and Plaid. I was helping Lowell as he was scaling his business at Quovo. And Lowell's a super smart guy. I've known him since like the first day of Quovo, right? And we've always interacted, professionally and personally. And so it was like just people I wanted around in that regard. Drew Lawton, Drew's just an incredible human being. And he was the CEO of New York Life, running their retirement business that sold to John Hancock. And Drew, I sat down at breakfast with him one time through one of our investors that had introduced us. And it was more like I sat down at breakfast with him. I remember this like it was yesterday. And he had this plan to basically shoot down my That was literally it. He was doing it as a favor to one of our would-be investors. Yeah. And he was like, all right, whatever. He's like, I'll hear this, idea that's, whatever. I'm sure it's nothing, right? And then when we walked out of there, he's pulled me aside. He's like, I had every intention, I didn't really want to come to breakfast with you. I didn't really want to do it. And I had every intention to just be like, this is, just go do something else with your life. And he's like, this is awesome. And he's like, I want to help any way I can. And he's been, again, he's like, I talk to him regularly and they're all still really actively involved, and they've all been a part of this since the very, very beginning. Josh Brown, same thing. Like Josh, we were chatting one day over a beer and he wasn't even really in this space, but Josh is a super smart dude. And he was just like, he's like, this is great, man. He's like, I love it. He's like, how can I help? And I was like, well, here's how I think you can help, right? Awesome. So it's been great how many people are just so willing to help and engage, at any level.
And the last question I'd like to ask you is, what's something you've been learning the recent year that you wish you knew many years ago?
Something I wish I knew many years ago. Oh, there's daily things that. Trying to think of something like meaningful. I think one of the things that this is not something like I've learned in the last year per se. Well, maybe I've learned a lot to let a lot more go than I used to. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that a long time ago. But I'm at a point now where I have a super strong team, and I've learned to let go and say they have it. I don't need to jump in on it. I've learned to be a better manager, a better CEO. In many ways, I still got a ton to learn, right? And there's a lot of room for improvement. But I do feel like I've gotten to a point where I've allowed myself to breathe, take a step back, recognize, celebrate a win. I used to never celebrate wins. I was one of those guys like something happened and it was like so far in my mind that it was already done. I was just moving past it, right? And I've been like told by like investors like, hey, take a step back, like be proud for a minute, like enjoy the moment, right? And you get, it's so easy just to keep going and going, right? Or you get you get families and personal lives, right? You kind of have to like take a time out, right? And my wife and I joke like we need to go like have a celebratory dinner with ourselves for everything that's happened in our lives that we never really get a chance to acknowledge. So we try to be more intentional in doing that, even if it's just like I'm sitting around and we're having dinner with screaming kids, and we're like, let's just pop a good bottle of wine and enjoy the craziness in our lives, right? So that I think I've been more cognizant that it wasn't natural for me to do that. It was just like go, and and that was it. But it's been fun. So I'm super proud to see how things have evolved. Still a ton of work to do, a lot of improvement. As we always say, like there's just a lot of wood to chop, and it's just you just got to keep going and hacking away at it. But we're at a point now where I've been very cognizant to stay focused on like their North Star and try not to. It's so easy to get distracted. I would say like for any earlier stage founders, like ignore the noise. It's so easy to like chase something that looks interesting and it just spirals into something that you didn't think it was, and it just derails your whole team. And when you're just like you're okay with saying no, and you have a reason for saying no, and you're like, here's where we need to be, and this is all we're going to do. I know that has worked so much better than the alternative.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that. I'm definitely the type of person that doesn't. I don't think I ever celebrate victories or wins. I always feel like, oh, there's the next hill to climb, next thing to pursue, and I will celebrate when I'm at the end, wherever that might be.
I know, right? But you do. You just get, even if it's something stupid, we're big. Like we celebrate our Series C, and I thankfully now I have people who are willing to tell me like, hey, go do that, like celebrate it. Like let's go do something, where before, maybe you didn't have that. So having people around there supportive that want to do that with you is very helpful.
Well, I've been very grateful for your time this past hour. I would love to give you the floor now, just in case any of our guests who are watching this right now want to follow you personally, reach out to you personally, or follow your company along in their journey. What's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I'm quite accessible. You can email me. It's just Aaron at Vestwell. LinkedIn, just look me up, or Twitter is just Aaron Schumm. However, most people know there's like I'm up more hours than I care to be. So if you get that window, the odds are you might get an email response from me at an odd hour. But yeah, no, happy to be in touch and be helpful. And I help a lot of founders out a lot too, because having done this, like I said a few times, you learn what to do, what not to do, and hope you can set people up for success down the road.
Well, thanks again for your time, Aaron. I will end the call, and I will just thank everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.